This is Maureen Kafkis, the Brain BS coach, here to tell you about the episode today. So, in this episode, I'm honoring my dad, Dutch. Dutch was a huge inspiration for me in many different ways, both good and bad, in who I've turned out to be today. And I loved him dearly, but I also had a lot of mixed feelings about him when I was younger. So I'm dedicating this episode to him, and I'm showing you that no matter what your relationship is with your parent, that once you become an adult, it becomes your responsibility. And it's up to you to figure out what you want to do with it. That doesn't mean you're responsible for everything that they did to you. It just means that you're responsible for figuring out how you want to feel and how you want to deal with it moving forward as an adult. I was originally going to do this as the last episode of the Men Who Inspire Me series, but due to scheduling reasons, it's not going to happen that way. So I have Tommy Gary next week, who is a coach, and he's going to wrap up the series. And then we're going to get into relationships on the Brain BS podcast. I'm really excited about this one because the first one is with Susan Page, who wrote the book Why Talking Is Not Enough. And we discuss the 8 loving actions that are needed in relationships and the power of one, which is going to be a big focus of my work moving forward. So I'm really excited to move into October and the rest of September with relationships. And then in November, I'm going to be taking the podcast on the road because Ginger and Basil, my two Cavapoos, and I are going on a road trip across the country. We are going to stop in Arkansas first to see my sister Peggy. And then Peggy and I are going to have a little adventure in Arkansas, and we will be sharing the takeaways, the ups, the downs, all of it while we're on the road together. And then I will continue on my own, and I have no idea where I'm going after that. I just know that just before Thanksgiving, like the week before or so, I'll be meeting up with my husband and letting him be part of the journey as well. So exciting times coming, but also kind of stressful. A lot of new stuff coming up because the road trip then is me spending the winter in California for the first time. So big changes going on here, which can be both, a little scary and exciting at the same time. So I look forward to doing this podcast. I love my dad. Everybody loved my dad. He was kind of like a local legend, or at least he would tell you that. He's very sports oriented. But anyway, we'll get into it when we get into the episode. So here we are. Sit back, settle in. Episode 160 of the Brain BS podcast, honoring my dad, Dutch. Do you want more out of your life, but not exactly sure what that might be? Are you longing for something but can't quite put your finger on what it is? That is the universe speaking to you, and it is time to listen up. I'm your host, Maureen Kafkis, the Brain BS coach. I created the Brain BS podcast to help people define what success means to them and show them how to get it. I help you to let go of fear and doubt and prepare your nervous system for success. I show you how to understand your own energy and to trust yourself to make all the decisions. If you are ready to go inward and stop looking outside yourself for all the answers, this is the podcast for you. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Brain BS podcast. Well, when I first decided to do a series on men who inspire me, I immediately knew my dad was going to be in the episode because my dad at the end of his life provided me with whatever it was that I needed to go inward and really tap into my strength and my medical background as an occupational therapist. And I was able to help him in a way that I had never been able to prior to that. I'd always been there to support him and try to help him as much as I could. And I would fly home and go to the hospital, help him with discharge planning and all that stuff. But I was an absolute nervous wreck when I did it because that's sort of like the whole history of my relationship with my dad. So when I was younger, I was kind of neurotic, to be honest with you, because I always thought I was upsetting him. I always thought I was making him mad. I had this facial twitch and it drove him crazy looking at me, probably because it was a reflection of his parenting, he thought, or that something was wrong and he should be fixing it. I mean, I can only wonder, based on how I am as a step parent now, how we can make things about ourselves that have nothing to do with us. But I always kind of got on his nerves. I was like, he'd call me Mr. Nice Guy. And why do you have to be such a Mr. Nice Guy and get yourself involved in these situations and helping people do things? So it always just sort of kind of bothered him. And I was loud, and we were not supposed to be loud. It drove him crazy. Like when we would go on vacation or we'd be up at the lake where we spent our summers, when the waves were big, I would be screaming like a maniac, and it drove him crazy. And when we were younger, it seemed like to me, and my siblings might disagree with me, there's nine of them. But when he yelled upstairs for us to be quiet, it was always, Mo, what's going on up there? Be quiet. Tell everyone to be quiet. I always felt like I was being singled out. That might not be accurate. That might be brain BS. But I think I'm a little bit on what I'm talking about. I think because I was loud. And he had this thing with noise. Like if you came into the living room and you sat down and you started eating an apple, it would piss him off and he would be really intolerant. And really, it was just that he was just being himself and telling you to get away from him. He doesn't want to hear the apple. But the little me who received that information didn't receive it that way. For me, it was a rejection of me. It was hurtful. It was painful. I was super sensitive. And it was just like he was not a good match for my sensitivity, or so I thought. Turns out he is one of my greatest teachers in life, and that's how it usually works out. The person who triggers you the most, that causes you the most distress, is the one that you are in a position to really, really learn from. And I really learned from my dad. So while he had his noise intolerance and he didn't want us to be a nuisance, God forbid, he was so worried we were a nuisance to other people and we would bother them. And it was just so confusing because I was just like, I think people like us. I think they want to talk to us, but maybe they don't. Maybe I'm completely off and they don't want us to. And my dad's right. He was also a yeller and very strict. And like when we would go to church, he kind of ran things like we were in a military or something. I mean, we would literally be in the car and we would drive to church, and I would have my skirt hiked up. And yes, we had to wear skirts to church until we were older, skirts or dresses or no jeans. I always envied the people who were allowed to wear jeans. And it would be hiked up and you'd have like your body turned, because when he opened the car, you had to fly out. There was no, and when church was over, you had to run to the car. You were not allowed to stop and talk and socialize with other people. He was very controlling that way. And I think it was because he had anxiety, and that was his way of controlling the environment to make him feel better. And like nobody was going to do anything to piss him off or set him off. But we still managed to do that anyway. So, and then the other thing too is like when we were first growing up, we sat at this dinner table, and there was two people on each end, and the whole table was like jam packed full of people, and we drank milk for dinner every night. And honest to God, almost every night somebody spilt their milk, and every single time he got totally pissed off. So it was just sort of a I'm going to say a lot of good things about him too, but I have to acknowledge this part of him. He was very intimidating. He was kind of scary, and I was a nervous wreck around him for the beginning of, my life till after my 40s, to be honest with you. It was a process for me to get comfortable and to feel confident around my father. But it's some of the most important work that I've done in my life, and I'm continuing to feed off that today. I just actually thought of another story too. When I was already married to Bob, so I was in my 40s, and we've been married for a few years and stuff. And when we were pulling out of the driveway, we hit the planter, and I was driving, and I begged my husband to take responsibility for it because I was terrified to tell my dad that I did it. I mean, honest to God, it was like a trauma reaction. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that that happened to me in my mid 40s, if not close to 50. But it did. It did. And it wasn't until years later we were all sitting around and I said, remember that time when you thought that Bob ran into the planter in the driveway and blah, 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 blah. And I said, that was me. And it felt really good to admit it. But I just give that as an example that the number of your age really has nothing to do with your relationship with your parent. It has to do with the way you're thinking about them and if you do any work around that relationship. Okay, so what else do I want to say about him? He was a lot of fun. He was hilarious. My dad had a great sense of humor. Everybody enjoyed hanging out with him. He even when he was being strict, and kind of scary and intimidating, it kind of made us laugh because it was just like, oh, that's Dutch, better not park in Miller's driveway or you could get in trouble from Dutch. It was just like he was such a presence, and everything had to revolve around what he wanted and what he told you to do. He was also the life of the party. So he was one of those guys that could make you feel intimidated, make you scared, make you nervous, but then he could also just make you feel amazing because he was paying attention to you, you were having fun with him, and he was a blast. He really could be the life of the party at times. So with the way he was kind of different, like sometimes he could be really fun and sometimes he wasn't, it kind of taught me to be really super observant of him and other people around me because I was an empath, so an open solar plexus in human design, which means I can actually feel other people's feelings. So it was really important to me to be aware of what was going on in my environment, because if somebody wasn't feeling well or something was going wrong or somebody was anxious or something needed to be addressed, I took that responsibility and I wanted to do that. And it looked like I was doing it for other people, and I was to a degree, but I was actually doing it for myself too, because it made me feel better when other people felt better. Does that make sense? That actually happens with a lot of us. Many times we think we're doing things for others, but it's really because we just don't want to be uncomfortable, and what they're doing is making us uncomfortable. I had a roommate that I lived with in Seattle, and she used to watch television shows, and she would get so uncomfortable when certain things were happening in a TV show, and just like, oh, I can't watch this, I can't watch it. And I was kind of like that too. And I find myself now when that happens, when I'm watching television or I'm in a situation, I find myself looking at it as a learning opportunity to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if there's one thing I know, the older you get, the more uncomfortable life is going to get, with all the challenges that we face and all the people that we lose and all the all the stressors, all this stuff. So I, when I was able to be vigilant of my environment, then I could adjust my expectations. I could read the room. I became very good at reading a room and reading people to find out what kind of mood they were in and how they were going to be in a given moment. And that really served me, especially as an occupational therapist working in the hospital setting, going in people's rooms during really traumatic times in their lives, sometimes in hospice, sometimes in the ICU, working with somebody who just had a spinal cord injury and is never going to be able to walk again. It was a lot of emotions and a lot of reading people and a lot of figuring out how to show up to that situation. Because clearly, if I go into a room and somebody just had a spinal cord injury and they're not going to be able to walk again, I'm not going to be super cheerful and energetic and full of life, because that might not go over well. In fact, I remember therapists that actually got feedback on that because the patients just didn't appreciate it. I think they probably just didn't feel emotionally connected to that person, and, or like seen. Maybe their situation wasn't seen. Anyway, it just made me a really good study for people's behavior and how they act, and I became really vigilant in that. And then I decided also that as I got older, that I didn't want to be like my dad. So he inspired me in that way, that he could be intimidating and scary. And yes, of course, I did hear that about myself from people too, because being someone who's direct and straightforward and outspoken, if you say something to somebody who hasn't dealt with their internal brain BS, and they don't know what their primary subconscious brain filters are, or another way of saying their lens of how they look at life, when somebody's direct and straightforward, it can be perceived as threatening and dangerous, because emotional safety is a real thing. So we talk about safety, and that was something in Youngstown, Ohio, that was kind of questionable too on a daily basis, with walking home to and from school, and the things that happened on the bridge between the public school and the private school. But the emotional safety piece, I think, is the biggest thing that I learned from my dad, how much of an impact it has on you. So I had just a lot of twitching, overeating, over drinking in high school and into my 20s and 30s even. a lot of numbing and a lot of going inward and shutting myself down. And it kind of formed the basis of how I dealt with men. So it's not surprising I didn't get married till 40 because I would always sabotage any potential relationship and do something to mess it up because I had a hidden agenda, which I talk about in my courses, a hidden agenda of staying small and safe. So even though I might want to meet someone and I might want to get married and I might want to be with them, another part of me did not want that at all because I didn't have the safety there. I didn't have the comfort of a day in and day out interaction with men. And then my brothers were awesome, but they were also kind of funny and would make fun of people and stuff. So it kind of made me feel like I just didn't trust guys. But I really didn't trust anybody or myself for that matter until I got much older. So then my dad, as I got older, like when he first started having health issues and stuff, he didn't really want my input. And I didn't care if he wanted it or not. I was giving it, which did not go over well with him. So I would send him things he should do to the house, and you should do this, you should do that, you should do this and that. And he would get so mad and he wanted nothing to do with it. So he was one of my greatest teachers of learning that you shouldn't offer people something that they're not asking for. And I did that a lot when I was younger. I offered things that nobody wanted, and then I would be resentful and hurt when they didn't receive what I was offering. So he was really good in teaching me that. And he also, like when I was in the hospital setting with him, he was super crabby and he would get really intense and he would be mean because he was scared. He was like a cornered animal. And something else you should know about my dad is that when he was in his late 20s and his wife went to the hospital to have a baby, and his wife Nancy died and so did the baby. So my dad had 6 children. His wife went, never came home, and he never had a day of therapy over that. He didn't do anything to address any of that. He didn't do because back then you didn't do that. You just accepted the new reality and you moved on. So then my mom met him and married him, and they had 4 more of us together, and I was one of those 4. So I'm number 9 out of 10. So it's really important to remember that because I keep that in mind all the time when I think about my dad. I think about how he just, like on the surface, acted like it was in the past and it was over. I wanted to talk about it with him at the end of his life, but he would have none of it. He didn't want to talk about anything. He barely wanted us in the room with him, which also has inspired me in the way I live my life. I don't want to be like that at the end of my life. I want to have, oh, I didn't expect to get emotional here, but I want to have meaningful conversations with the people who love me. And I want them to know that I love them when I'm on my way out. I want to give them those warm, fuzzy moments that they need. I don't want to be mean and crabby and nasty. And it's, and I know he didn't do it on purpose, but it was really challenging for all of us. And then when you would try to do, like when I would try to help him in healthcare, I had to sneak behind his back and I had to go to the doctors and talk to them in advance without him knowing and tell them, say this, say that, say this, because then he'll do this and that and that. And it worked, but it was exhausting. It was exhausting to have to go behind his back and for him not to trust me or think that I knew what I was talking about. And then I'm trying to remember, I don't remember exactly what the situation was. And I can't go into all the details of all the things that we went through together with his healthcare. But I just remember one time being in the hospital and I said something to him and he goes, wow, you really do know what you're talking about. It's like, oh my God. It was like amazing to finally be acknowledged by my father as somebody who knows what they're talking about in a field they'd been into, for over 20 years. But it was kind of a pivotal moment because then I didn't have to hide anymore. Because when I was hiding things and being manipulative and behind the scenes, it served him, but it didn't serve me. It made me small. I was being small to accommodate my dad. I was diminishing me to make him feel better about him. And it just isn't, that doesn't work for me. I don't want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person that, but you have to have a nervous system to support what you're doing, which is what I talk about here at the Brain BS podcast. So you have to be able to go inward to master that brain BS that's going on inside you. And then you need to create a nervous system to support the actions that you have to take to do that. And I couldn't support fighting with him and arguing with him face to face and not hiding what I was doing. That was the only way I could do it. And I'm totally okay with that. And you're okay too if you're going at a slower pace and you're not being as forthcoming as you would like because it doesn't feel comfortable, it's too scary, and it's emotionally unsafe. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the process, right? But that's why you do this work of going inward and learning how to live consciously so that you can show up as the most powerful version of you that you can be. And then that's what I ended up doing over the years. And then by the time my dad was at the end of his life, I could tell he was super miserable. I could tell that he was really depressed, that just he wanted to give up, but he didn't have permission to give up because he was an athlete and he worked so hard, and he just never gave up on anything, and he just kept going and going. And the one day in physical therapy, I've talked about this before on an episode, I just said, Dad, do you want to keep doing this? Do you want to keep doing the therapy? He's like, well, don't I have to? And I'm like, no, not if you don't want to. You get to do whatever you want. You earn that. Do you want to keep doing it? And he's like, not really. I'm like, okay, then no more therapy. You don't have to come in here. You don't have to do this. Because you could just tell it was beating him down going in there day in and day out. But I also knew that there was no solution here because he was at the end of his life. And it was a matter of, I didn't know how long, but I sensed that it was coming soon, but nobody else really did. So I talked to the facility and I asked them to get him a hospice consult. Because hospice doesn't mean, and I want all of you to hear this because it could benefit a family member of yours. Hospice does not mean you're throwing in the towel, that you're giving up on the person, that you're ready for them to die, and that's it. A hospice consult tells you whether the person's near the end of their life or not. Okay? Just because you get one doesn't mean you actually have to keep hospice. And you can leave hospice whenever you want. So we did the hospice consult, and that brought up a few things for different family members who thought it was too soon. Maybe we were pushing him. But here's the thing. My dad hadn't been talking to any of us for quite some time before then. He wanted us to be there, but he didn't want to talk to us. He didn't want us to watch the TV. He didn't want us to be on our phone. He just wanted us to sit there and witness his misery. I mean, quite honestly, that's what it was like at the end. So there were no warm, fuzzy moments coming, in my opinion. I did not see that as even an option. And I just wanted to see him, not suffer so much. So we did the consult. He had a really big sore on his back too, an open sore that went down to the bone. I was very concerned about that and the pain that he was in around that. So it turned out he died a few weeks later. So he did not live long. And one of the things that I see in the hospital all the time is people waiting too long to get hospice. So I will forever be grateful that I was inspired to do that and that we were able to keep him from experiencing, pain for who knows how long because of his inability to actually ask for a hospice himself or, to just say that he had enough. So it was actually really interesting because it was sad and but it was empowering to me to know that I could show up for my dad in a way that like 10 years ago, I never would have been able to. And that was even before I've done all this work and before I went back and he inspired me to go back and get my doctorate in occupational therapy because I was going to be an elder care consultant and help other people the way I helped him. And I felt really good about that. It felt really correct. And it's just an example of how the universe takes you from one step to the next because then COVID hit and being an elder care consultant wasn't even a possibility. So that kind of went out the window. And that's when I found out about the life coach school. But I would have never gone to the life coach school if I didn't get the online doctorate because I didn't even know how to use a computer at the beginning of my 50s. And the only way that I could go to school was if I did it online because the local situation didn't work out. And the thought, like if somebody told me when I was signing up for the online doctorate, where I was a basket case showing up for classes the first year because I was afraid I was going to do something wrong and look stupid. If somebody told me that I would end up having a podcast and doing an online business and all the stuff I'm doing today, I would have told them they are absolutely out of their minds. It's not even possible. So I share that with you because anything's possible if you keep taking actions. If something comes up for you, you get an idea or an inspiration, follow it. It's happening for a reason. It wouldn't come up if you weren't supposed to follow it. But often we don't follow it. But after he died, I just knew I had to do something. I knew I had been twiddling my thumbs for too long anyway. I had not been doing occupational therapy for some time. I was filling a huge void. I wasn't really enjoying my life, and on the outside, it looked like I should be. And it's because I wasn't living my purpose and I wasn't even remotely living up to my potential. So my dad inspired me to, he inspired me for this chapter of my life. Um, Again, not expecting to get emotional here, but he really did. And I swear to God, I can see him all the time, like just up there looking down on me because he knows exactly what I'm doing. There's no doubt in my mind. And my mom, I love my mom too, so I don't want to not mention my mom in this podcast. But my mom was at the beginning of my journey. She died, it's been 18 years ago this month. I wasn't really on my spiritual and mental health journey then. So it was really, I didn't really get inspired by my mom. I really fell into a deep grief, and that there was menopause around that time. It was a really super challenging time in my life. And I wasn't able to step into the next phase of who I wanted to be then. I needed more to happen, and that's how it is in life. Things continue to happen until you are inspired to go to the next level. And often it's painful things and things that make you really uncomfortable and things that you wish weren't happening. But those things can sometimes be like the best thing for you when it comes to your personal growth and living up to your potential. So here I am now, and I'm inspired by things about my dad all the time. I think about him frequently. The November's coming up, and that's when we lost him around Thanksgiving. So and my mom we lost in September. So just because somebody's gone doesn't mean they can't continue to inspire you. And I'm reminded that like sometimes I can act like him. Sometimes I can be crabby. Sometimes I can be short with my husband and with the kids. And sometimes I can be controlling and I can be, like kind of yell and not sound as nice as I would like to sound. And I acknowledge that about myself. I understand that. We all have that, by the way. So me announcing that on the podcast isn't like I'm sharing something with you that you don't know because you all know that you have it too. If you don't, you're a really good people pleaser and you're hiding it from other people because we are wired to experience all the emotions, not just the good ones. So this idea that we're going to be good all the time is like craziness. And I just want to add too that I absolutely love my dad. I still absolutely love my dad. And he was far from perfect. In fact, there was a lot of things when I was younger that there was times where I didn't even ever want to be around him again. And I still loved him like completely. So you do not have to be perfect to be lovable. You don't have to be perfect to have people care about you and want to be in a relationship with you and interact with you. I think I had a little bit of the perfectionism thing my whole life because I never felt like I was good enough, in a large part from hanging around with my dad when I was younger, if I'm totally honest. But he didn't think he was enough either. So he really wasn't directing that at me. It was more about him. And it was about the things that he experienced in his life. So God bless them. God bless my older siblings and everything they went through with not being able to fully grieve and talk about their mom in a way that I would certainly want to if it was my mom who died. And I just, and my dad was so funny. I mean, he just did hilarious stuff. I can't even like he would sing and carry on, and he would dot the I for the Ohio State marching band, when we would have football Saturdays and stuff. So he also really inspires me with just being fun and his leadership qualities and his discipline and his ability to, practice restraint when it came to food and beverage, even when he stopped drinking as he got older because he had, um, cardiac condition. It's uh, for the AFib. So he was pretty impressive. His work ethic was amazing. He taught me a lot of things that I think are really super valuable. So he's been a really big inspiration to me in many many ways. And in some of the ways, they're not ways that I would have chosen to be inspired, but that's law of polarity, right? I talk about law of polarity here at the podcast. That universal law is that your prayers are always getting answered, but they don't always look the way you think they should. So the universe has a way of giving you what you need to live up to your potential and step into your personal power. And what you need isn't always what you think you need, and it's not almost never what you want. So you just have to be open to that. And I hope that you can reflect on this episode and you can think about someone in your life who inspires you, but also caused you a little bit of distress and was kind of challenging for you. And choose love. Choose to love them anyway. And step into your personal power and figure out how to learn about that relationship you had with them, and become the person that you want to be, the person that can handle that and who can take responsibility for their own emotions and find it in their heart to see the whole picture of the person, and to love them deeply. Well, you wouldn't know this because I can edit and I can stop the tape, but I actually just went for a walk and came back and I realized that I did not mention sports in this episode. And there's no way I'm doing a podcast about my dad and not talking about sports, because that has been a big inspiration for me. I love football. I love basketball when my teams are doing good and baseball when they're doing good, but I love football, especially college football. But I'm actually really excited about the Cleveland Browns this year, because I can't get too excited about the Chicago Bears. They're not off to a very good start. But my dad's love of sport, the way he refereed high school football and basketball, and then he did a time clock down at the university. He inspired all of us in our family to think sports was fun. So did my mom. My mom sang Carmen, Ohio as a lullaby to us when we were babies. So we were always a sports minded family. We had rallies and events for tennis matches, boxing matches, or whatever you call boxing things. I hate boxing now. But I was always a Joe Frazier fan over Muhammad Ali when I was younger. But I had to mention that. I knew there was no way I could close the episode without mentioning his love of sports. But even with that, I remember once having a conversation with him and he became furious with me because I said that athletes shouldn't make as much money as they do and that they're overpaid. And he just got so mad. And I understood like his love of sports, and I do too, and the whole teamwork thing and like all the fun times. I mean, I actually feel sorry for people who don't like to watch sports, especially football, because it's so fun. It's such a huge part of my social life in the fall. But I stand by what I said. I think people in sports are ridiculously overpaid, and that there's people who should be getting a lot more of that money, like teachers and healthcare professionals that are really helping people. I mean, sports is fun. I really enjoy it. It goes deeper, the camaraderie, the lessons learned, and all that, but they're still overpaid. So that like actually just brings up the last thing I want to say about my dad, and that's like a little bit of tribe mentality going on there, and he was the leader of the tribe, if you know what I mean. So he kind of expected us to think the way he did, and he didn't like it when we didn't. As I got older, it became harder and harder for me to hide who I really was and to not speak up and not tell my truth. And it was difficult for him. And we had a few incidents where he got upset with me. He thought I was real touchy and I was hard to deal with. And of course, I thought that he was. And we had some interactions like that. But at the end, we had a really close relationship. It was a really good relationship. I felt good about him, and I felt close to him, and I loved him, and I was more open with him, and I shared my opinions more, even when he didn't like it. And it was still kind of hard because that's my dad. But you know, that's relationships, and that's why sometimes they don't look the way you think they should. But don't make no mistake about it. Nobody has a perfect relationship with their dad or with anybody else in their life. We just think that. Our brain BS likes to make us think that, but it's not true. So that's all I have for you today, guys. I felt really good doing this episode. Made me feel close to my dad. Made me think about my mom, how lucky I am to be a member of my family and have the brothers and sisters that I do, and to be where I'm at in my life right now in such a good place, turning 60 this year, and really being in a better place than I ever have been in my whole life. So I know you learned something valuable here today. I'll see you next episode. Thanks for being here and learning about Brain BS. I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you did, please take a little time to do a quick review, give me 5 stars, and share it with everyone you know. If you're actually interested in being on the podcast yourself or have questions about it, you can find me in the Brain BS podcast community on Facebook. See you next time.